Ron Butler, who I think he drove, but he could have walked over the hill from Harry Cooper Supply. I think that's where he works during the day. But he's going to make the presentation, and he'll tell you what all he wants to tell you. And one thing, he's from Joplin, and there's a lot of music in Joplin that it'd be great to have a presentation sometime just so we can see what all Joplin has contributed to the Ozarks music scene. And so, Ron, if you're ready, come on.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being here. Appreciate it very much. I am from Joplin, but I got out of Joplin before being arrested. I'd really would like to start my story with my involvement with Springfield, because this is where we are. And for me, my story with Springfield starts with December 8th, 1980. While many of us were watching Monday Night Football, I was at the home of David Word, their drummer for our new band, The Press, and that was our rehearsal spot in his home. We were hosting a party for friends to introduce a new group at that time. Chip Wooden was our lead guitarist, and his wife, Debbie, was a feature reporter for the Joplin Globe. We ran through our best new songs, I'm a Man by Joe Jackson, Shake Some Action by the Flamin' Groovies, Slow Down by the Beatles, or so we thought. You know, that's not a Beatles song. It was loud and mostly energetic, but it was fun. But just after 10 o'clock, a phone call came to the house, and Debbie answered. Then, absolutely screaming, she climbed onto a coffee table to get everyone's attention, to tell us what had just come over the Associated Press wire in the newsroom. In disbelief, we turned on the television, and there was Howard Cosell at the end of the game intoning, John Lennon murdered, you know. It was needless to continue. The party for the press was over. The Beatles couldn't get back together, and to quote John, the dream was over. I was angry when Robert Kennedy was killed. I was a little fearful when Martin Luther King was killed, but when John was killed, I was in utter shock and grief, as many were. A couple of weeks later, our real debut for the press was an opening set for Fool's Face at Humphrey Clinker's on Christmas night. So 1980 ended with a high note and a low note. In that summer of '81, I moved to Springfield and began working as a printer's apprentice at the Big Red Q printing, Double Q printing. Now, Jim Wirt had encouraged me to come to town. He introduced me to Vic Davis and Rudy Reeves, and soon we began plotting a new band. A few months before, in the summer, I'd happened to see Chris Kaufman playing at the Bottom Line with the group The Snapshots. I think they were opening from The Mistakes at the time. And by saying I saw Chris play, I mean that I was blown away. Then I learned the kid was still in high school. So when I caught up with him at Beggar's one day, you know, renting a video, I think that was the only place to go, I introduced myself and asked him to start a band with Victor, Rudy, and I. We named ourselves after a song I'd written called The New Electrics. All of us were working, and Chris was going to school, so we played at the Bottom Line Thursdays through Saturdays. And we had a cool gig at the Record Center on Valentine's Day with Man About Town. We traveled into the Blue Note, opening for Fool's Face, and an English band called the Rock Cats. We were hoping to make that impressive array of returning acts to the Blue Note, but we broke up just as Chris graduated with honors from Glendale High School. He joined the Artists of Kansas City that summer with our good friend Joe Guido Welsh. I took a job at Brown Derby, and in off-duty days began a little woodshedding with Brian Kaufman, who was home between Fool's Face gigs. Brian was around to help me with some melodies, and we wrote a couple of songs together. That autumn, we expanded our little experiment to include Terry Wilson, who was home from tours with the Daredevils. We wrote and recorded a handful of songs over a period of weeks, a collection I called The Occasional Living Room, with a slight nod to Elvis Costello's Imperial Bedroom. One song we included in the project was called Lover's Eyes, written by future Academy Award winner Tom Whitlock and sung by Julie DeMate. But before we could put a band together, Wilson moved to LA, where he's done very well in the film industry. If you saw The Night at the Museum, you know the depth and breadth of his talents. The next memory, well, it may only be notable to me, but I got a perm. A big perm. I was ready for MTV. Coincidentally, Katie Kaufman gave me a call. She was working with the all-girl group, the Peppercats. And their bassist, Terry Cohn, was not going to be able to continue playing. She had arthritis, and she had to stop playing. Katie asked if I could fill in a few dates while her sister Carol worked up to speed on a keyboard, bass, and piano. So I borrowed an extra from Kevin Brashears of The Mistakes and learned to play bass. The real band included Sharon Ward, Katie, and Beth Stovall. We traveled to Heartbreak Hotel in St. Louis and had a great gig at the Bottom Line, and I'd just about gotten comfortable with my new role when Carol was ready to go. Thus, the proper balance of the all-girl group was restored. In July, Katie did a little bit of star-making. Without talking to Brian or Chris, she booked a gig at the Hangar over on St. Louis Street, headlining the Peppercats with special guests Brian, Ron, and Chris. We'd been named and booked before we even had a band. Brian was pretty cheesed because he just finished quitting with Fool's Face and didn't shine much about the idea of jumping into another group. But I was pretty excited. I loved the Kaufman brothers, and they were great friends, talented musicians and collaborators. I admire the whole family. We played the set, and it felt great, and bam, we had a band. A few weeks later, we were booked again at the Hangar, again with the Peppercats. Then something came up. One Monday night, the Mistakes asked me to join them. And here I was between the proverbial rock and hard place. The Mistakes were rolling. They had a booking agency in Chicago, regularly traveled to Iowa City, Carbondale, Champaign, Chicago, the Blue Note in Columbia, Parody Hall in Kansas City. They were getting great press and some big opening slots with bands like the Eurythmics and the Romantics and others. They were planning for a second album to follow up their national pastime. Working with Terry Wilson, Brian, and Chris, I developed confidence in my songwriting abilities, and by now had several songs stacked up. It was material I was proud of. Kevin Brashears had given the band his notice, but would stay on while I transitioned into the program. I agreed, and then that Friday, after our Brian, Ron, and Chris set, I had to tell the fellas I was leaving to join the Mistakes. And this was heartbreaking for me. I love those guys. Chris returned to SMS, and Brian accepted an invitation to join a band called Single Bullet Theory and moved to Virginia. And I was on the road with the Mistakes. And that first winter of 83, 84 was a Lulu. Full houses at every stop, and beside the regular business, we opened for Midnight Oil in Chicago. And in April, we opened for the Culture Club at the Old Keel Auditorium in St. Louis. It's still a little hard for me to believe. They were at the top of the charts, top 10 single, and it was a top 10 grossing concert for the week in Billboard magazine. Culture Club / The Mistakes. It was crazy. But more to the truth of the matter was that for that Saturday gig, we left the day before on Friday to drive to Chicago to play a college dance. It was a money gig, you know. And as we finished the last number of the night, it must have been about 11 o'clock or so, Roger Starnes and Joe French, our crew, were already wrapping cables and wheeling things out the door, because when we got everything packed up, we drove overnight to Iowa City, where we had a noon gig the next day. Then, yeah, talk about a nervous drive, bouncing around in a van. Anyway, by 2 o'clock after this gig, Joe had dropped us off at an airport. The van loaded with our stage gear and with our guitars in the plane with us. He raced us to the Kiel Auditorium. We chartered a 6-passenger plane to get us to St. Louis so we could check into a hotel, so we could shower, get dressed, and go to the sound check and the concert. Joey didn't have that opportunity. We played for 35 minutes, I recall. 15,000 Culture Club fans gave us a pretty nice reception, but then went crazy for the club. When we returned to our hotel with a few friends in a partying mood, I fell right to sleep. I was exhausted. I've never been so tired in my life. But then the next morning, on Sunday, we got back up and drove home to Springfield, where we played at Bombay Bicycle Club, another money gig. But it was home. Well, if you're not counting, it was 4 gigs, 3 states, in 3 days. But on May 1st, something really, really important happened to me. While out with friends at the hangar to see Big Twist and the Mellow Fellows, who shared the booking agent with us and the Elvis Brothers, I just happened to meet Kristen. She was in town visiting college friends. And before she returned to Denver 6 days later, we started a little romance that lasts to this day. We'll celebrate our 30th wedding. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. You don't have to stand. We'll celebrate our 30th anniversary on August 3rd of this year. I'll skip ahead a little bit to 1985. Around the time of October 9th, John Lennon's birthday, I began thinking about a musical event to honor his memory. On the first anniversary of John's death, there had been radio shows recounting his reemergence to the charts, and of course the murder that shocked everyone. But what about a little concert now to comfort those of us who still mark December 8th as a day of great loss? Maybe turn that sadness into something positive. I'll wait for that. No. What if we held a gathering, played some of our favorite Beatles songs, and if we could manage to raise a little money for charity? First, I called on Jimmy Frink. Now, Fool's Face had moved to Los Angeles the previous autumn, but Jimmy had returned to Springfield in the spring to be with his father in his final days. And Chris and I hadn't been on the road with the Mistakes that summer. He, Jimmy, and Ray Cardwell and I had occasionally played as the Jimmy Frink Experience. Great days. Jimmy and Ray later formed Jimmy Black and the Motion, with Tia Kerwin on guitar, Katie on drums, Pat Spurlock on bass. Jimmy got the word from the guys and succeeded in bringing the motion to the program. That was a good start. I called on Wonderly next. He was at Call on One Studios in those days, assisting Lou Whitney. I first met Wonderly at Drury College at the December 8th, 1981 screening of Let It Be. In those days, some of you may remember, Jim was working at Beggar's Banquets. He brought a huge old television, set up some amplification and a video player, Beta or VHS, I don't know. He turned a small classroom into a modest temporary theater. It was a somber gathering, that first anniversary of Lennon's death, especially watching the documentary of the Beatles' highly dysfunctional Let It Be movie. Wonderly told me the Dog People wouldn't be able to play, but he called Joe Terry, and they would be there at the show. Next, I called Lou Whitney. Though we hadn't had much prior contact to this, he thought it was a great idea and had a new band, Nancy and Sluggo, featuring Bobby Lloyd on drums, I think, and of course Nancy was singing. Our roster was starting to look real good. Rudy and the Razors were next. The band had originally included Rudy Reeves, Victor Davis, and Jim Wirt until he joined Fool's Face in '79. Now Jerry Ravella, their original drummer for the Mistakes, was playing with them. With all these folks ready to put the program on, I really needed the Mistakes. We had the Dynamite PA and Dynamite Light system. In those days, we took everything with us to set up for clubs and college days. Joe French and Roger Starnes agreed to the task of setting up so the rest of us could play. The concert day was on a Sunday, maybe the only weekday off for all of us, and now we had a great lineup. For this wild idea, I had to pay a tribute to John Lennon. So we had the Mistakes, Jimmy Black and the Motion, Rudy and the Razors, Nancy and Sluggo, Wonderly, and the always effervescent Joe Terry. Just after posters were printed, I heard from Dale McCoy, still playing in Los Angeles with the Fool's Face. Fortunately, we had included plus special guests on the bill because Dale was coming to be on the show too. Mark Marimont at the Newsleader was well known to all of us, often seen at the Dog People shows or the Bel Airs, Fool's Face. He was a tremendous asset, writing about all the groups in the Springfield scene, the records and shows, recounting the 4-star review of the Morels' Shake and Push album in the Rolling Stone. He was a real champion of the Springfield scene. When I phoned him to talk about our tribute, he put me in touch with Elliot Mintz, John and Yoko's longtime associate, who at the time happened to be Don Johnson's press agent. For some professional guidance, Elliot took a great deal of time carefully explaining to me exactly what I was going to need to do. We needed to establish a foundation in order to raise charitable funds. Oh, we hadn't thought of that. Registering with the state of Missouri, having stuff notarized, and whatnots and what have yous, you know. I selected the name Acorn Foundation. Beatle people remember that John and Yoko had an Acorns for Peace event in 1969, mailed an acorn to heads of states all over the world. We needed a board of directors with Kristen, Jimmy Frink, Jim Wonderly, and I signed the official documents. Roger Starnes' dear mother was a local church secretary and notarized our forms and applications when everything was in place. I called Elliot back with the details of our plan, and on behalf of Yoko, he approved our request to hold the concert, Imagine, a tribute to John Lennon. We decided this event shouldn't be held at a smoky bar. No diss, Mr. Lindbergh. It just didn't feel right. We hoped to attract at least a respectable-sized audience with our great lineup. Thinking about venues, Kristen and I remembered the house concert series at the Vandervoort Theater. We appreciated those smoke-free, family-friendly experiences. But that lovely space we thought might be a little small for a rock show. Plus, it was upstairs, load-in. So I reserved the Springfield Art Museum, and they agreed to let us pay the rent from the proceeds. We learned a lot about other concert logistics, security, volunteer staff, venue insurance, for example. Bill White Insurance, there's a plug for you, helped us with that first year and many years following. Honestly, everywhere we turned, people were generous and eager to offer their support. TC at McSalty's donated a mountain of pizza pie. I should mention that pre-concert food and a cool rockin' t-shirt were all that anybody ever got for playing at the Imagine shows. Endless Summer, Media Art, KWTO all pitched in to make that concert a possibility. The show was a pretty good success with a small audience. At the end of the night, we drove across town to Bombay Bicycle Club for some celebrating and began planning the show for the next year. The second year was even better, and we filled the little auditorium and were asked not to ever come back again. In the process of securing Yoko's permission for the third concert, I asked if she would be willing to share a message with us, thinking maybe she would write a letter we could read at the event. But to my surprise, her office replied that Yoko would be available for a live interview at the radio station. US 97 was our media partner, and Mike Schmidt was the man at US 97. Suddenly we were dumbstruck. Yoko was in Geneva, and we had her phone number. Wonderly met Kristen and I at the station, and Mike placed the call at, I think it was about a 10 o'clock hour, local, Missouri. He was live on the air at the time, and we were going to interview her on the air. When Yoko's phone was answered by her staff, they answered, "Please stand by for Yoko." Just as Yoko came on the phone, and then what I can only assume was standard radio procedure in those days, Mike threw me the phone and said, "You got to stall Yoko. I have to play a commercial." Yeah, I'll do that. But she was gracious, complimentary of our concept, and supportive of our humble efforts. When asked, she said it was the only such project she knew of in the world, and it pleased her greatly. I can't believe I had to stall Yoko. Well, after the concert, we sent Yoko our packet of Imagine materials with posters and newspaper clippings, and a report of our funds that we raised and a description of the charity. A few days later, to our utter amazement, she sent a matching check made out to that charity. It was the kitchen that year, and the next year was the family center, and it was somebody else the year after that. She did this for many years to come. During the first concert, the window from initial phone calls to showtime was only 7 weeks. Crazy. The Imagine concert that we started raised less than $500 the first year for the Ozarks chapter of the National Council on Alcoholism. But we had planted the seeds of a community tradition that still continues 30 years later. I couldn't have predicted it, but after the show, people were sold in the event. I didn't have to ask for people to participate. I really had to figure out how to include everyone that wanted to participate. We've had many highlights of the show over the years. A couple of them are, remember the 4th year when Ned Wilkinson, or Ned the Band, as he's known, transcribed string parts and horn parts for Strawberry Fields Forever, I Am the Walrus, and Good Morning, Maybe All You Need Is Love. A couple of years later, we had 5th graders and some moms from the Roundtree Elementary, Rhythm of Roundtree School Choir sing Happy Christmas, War is Over at the program. Nothing touches hearts like kids. Bob Walkenhorst came to town on the 4th year and the 5th year to be our guest star. We've had Eric Amble, Roscoe's gang, came to town to play with the Skeletons twice, I think. Lou even invited Marshall Crenshaw to play for us 1 year, and he said yes. We managed to pull that one off and had McDonald County, it was McDonald Arena. McDonald Arena was packed during an ice storm. We also remember some of our friends who were on the program that aren't here anymore. Bill Brown, Don Ships was always a dynamic part of the show. And Wonderly, of course. We miss him. We miss them all. I've been stopped in my tracks more than once when a fully grown man or woman come up to me and say, "I've been coming to these Imagine shows since I was a kid." And then 3 or 4 years ago, I was privileged to have our talented daughters, Natalie and Julia, join us on stage to play cello and piano with us. Early on, we realized the importance of having professionals help present our program. And for many years, Mark West at Down Home Productions was our full partner in presenting these programs. Later on, these days, Hype Media is doing a lot of that now also. Imagine has grown larger and more eclectic over the years. When we expanded to Claire Thompson for the 3rd year, then we had to go to University Plaza for the fourth year, we kept selling these little rooms out. We found a home at Central High School Auditorium and eventually McDonald Arena. During the last couple of years of the program, we worked at the Remingtons. As some of you know now, since it's been revived, Imagine now sells out the historic and beautiful Galois Theater, thanks to the able leadership of the new master of the Imagine, Matt Netzer, and company. But to me, the beauty of the Imagine is because of what it's done to support a variety of local-based charities and incredible diversity of talent it brings. It's formed a family of musicians and faithful attendees year after year. It's sober rock and roll, drawing people of all ages back to Springfield from miles around. I sometimes looked out to see 3 generations singing along. Nobody leaves Imagine without a smile. And we've had a lot of fun. We've made some really good music and many, many friends. I'm really grateful that Matt Netzer still lets some of us old guys play the new program. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me here. We appreciate very much having this opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.
Are there any questions? I think you said a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did you ever think Imagine would last and grow as it has when you first started?
Oh, not at all. That was beyond anything I ever thought of. I mean, we were just getting together for a little music party, and it was very modest. I think we had more people on the Imagine stage last year than were in the audience the first year. I think there may have only been 150 people, but just right after the show, it was like, what are we doing next year? And so it just kept building. I joke, but we seriously, the second year, we filled up the art museum, and they didn't want us back. The next year, we did the Claire Thompson Hall, and they didn't want us back either. We filled that place up. So it grew exponentially through the years, and when I had stopped doing it early in this century, when it came back, it's been beyond anybody's wildest dreams that I've ever seen for a little local show. It's been really great.
Thank you for your effort.
Thank you.
So do you still stay in touch with Yoko about the concert every year? And are there any other cities doing this? Or
Well,
is this trademarked? Or?
You know, that radio concert, or radio conversation we had, we were pretty stunned that she said that this is the only one she'd heard of. But we may have been the only ones that bothered to do things on the high road and ask her for permission. Because nowadays you look on YouTube and there have been the 30th annual John Lennon tribute by some lookalike guy in Minneapolis or something. You know, those things have been going on all the time. But no, I don't personally. I messaged her a few years ago when the event was revived, and she messaged back. And I think she's matched the funds for this latest efforts also, hasn't she?
I think so.
Yeah. So that's pretty gratifying.
Best show of the year.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mike?
Hey, Ron, talk a little bit about working with Lou at Column 1.
Oh, well. That was great. I was working with the Big Beat Club. I was minding the counter at Hoover Music at that time. And he came into the store one day and said Wonderly was going to start his own studio, and would I like to come to work with him? And I literally leapt over the counter to say yes. But that was great. I'd been taking him demo tapes for a couple of years, and he'd been coaching me through songwriting. But he brought me in and offered to show me, and did show me, from the ground up, everything about the analog recording studio. I wouldn't be able to do anything in a studio nowadays, but it was a grand experience. I was literally under his wing and under his feet for many days and sessions, and it was great. Maybe 2 years went by, and then there would be the odd session come in where I remember a biker gang came in one day. And Lou and I were there for the appointment, and they all rolled up on Harleys, and these guys came in leather, and the guy came in and said, "Hey, this is a nice studio. Want to do some crank?" And shortly after the meeting, Lou said, I think I'm going to let you handle this session, Ron. But it was great. You know, I wrapped cables and spooled the tape on, and I eventually worked up to where I was able to run a session or two myself. But it seemed like it lasted a decade. But it was only 2 or 3 years. But that's a high point of my little musical career for me. It's working with Lou Whitney, for sure.
One of our heroes.
Yeah.
Is Jimmy Frank really any good?
At what?
Jimmy Frank was good when he was 16.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, he's a Jim. He messaged me a little bit ago, said he wished he could be here.
Is he still in California?
No. He returned from California, that was 83, wasn't it? And he's been here ever since. I got him his job. That sounds great. When I was working there in 1985 or 86.
Did you know him when he was with Hang Dog?
No, I met Jimmy in 1980 when he was with Fool's Face in the Joplin area. They came down, and I ingratiated myself to those guys immediately. And yeah, so we've been friends since then. As a matter of fact, right after John Lennon was killed, I called him, but it turned out not to be him. So. I was talking to somebody's dad. But, yeah, we've been friends ever since. He is really good. He's really, really good. He can't help it. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate this.